Beneath the timeless arches of the Vatican, where duty and devotion echo through history, one young Swiss guard made a silent choice that would leave a nation breathless. This is not just a story of tradition, it's a story of courage, loyalty, and the quiet strength that changes hearts. Watch closely as a single act speaks louder than words. Comment below where you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. On a morning heavy with sorrow and tradition, St. Tutre, Peter Square became a stage for one of the most moving moments in recent memory. Beneath a sky softened by mist, thousands gathered to pay their final respects to Pope Francis, a humble servant of the people. The Swiss guards, steadfast in their brilliant uniforms of red, blue, and gold, stood like sentinels of history, their figures unwavering before the eyes of the world. Commandant Schmidt had made it clear, if even one guard moves, it will dishonor the Pope himself. Perfection was not simply expected, it was demanded. Among these disciplined figures stood Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman, a man who had spent 14 years mastering the sacred stillness of his post. Yet this day was unlike any other. Hidden beneath the folds of his uniform, close to his heart, rested a letter written by Pope Francis himself, a message of trust, compassion, and something more powerful than rules. As the coffin appeared, humble in its simplicity, Lucas felt the weight of duty clash with a deeper calling. Soon, before thousands in the square and millions beyond, he would make a choice, one that would redefine loyalty and remind the world what true honor looks like. Within the austere barracks of the Swiss Guard, as dawn approached, Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman prepared his uniform with the same meticulous care he had practiced for 14 faithful years. The crisp folds, the gleaming brass buttons, the precision of every detail. Each movement carried the weight of centuries of tradition. Yet on this morning, his hands trembled ever so slightly, a betrayal of the turmoil stirring quietly within. Beneath the layers of polished cloth and armor, close to his beating heart, Lucas tucked a letter, handwritten by Pope Francis himself. It was a simple piece of parchment, but it carried a gravity greater than any sword or shield he had ever borne. The Pope's words were clear, tender, and quietly powerful, reminding him that sometimes true fidelity required courage beyond standing still. As the bells of St. Peter's began their low, somber toll, Lucas fastened the final clasp of his breastplate and took a long, steadying breath. Today, he was not merely a guard in splendid attire. He was the keeper of a promise, one made between a humble pope and a soldier of conscience. He knew the risk. One wrong movement would be seen not just as personal failure, but as a betrayal of sacred trust, a blemish upon the pageantry of the Vatican itself. And yet, deep within, Lucas understood that duty without compassion was a hollow ritual. As he stepped into the growing light of the square, the polished stones beneath his boots seemed to whisper the memories of generations past. Lucas was ready, not to defy tradition, but to fulfill it in a way few would understand, and even fewer would dare to attempt. In stillness, he carried a secret. In silence, he prepared to act. Years before the solemn day of the funeral, Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman had experienced a moment that would forever alter the course of his service. It was during an ordinary May audience, when the Vatican courtyards were alive with pilgrims and tourists. Amid the crowd's hum, a child's terrified cry cut through the air. Without hesitation, Lucas had broken from his assigned position, a small but undeniable breach of protocol, to lift the frightened boy above the sea of people and return him to his desperate mother. At the time, it seemed a minor incident, quickly forgotten by many. Yet 2 days later, Lucas was summoned, not to a reprimand, but to a private meeting with Pope Francis himself. In a modest study bathed in soft afternoon light, Lucas found himself face to face with the Holy Father. Francis, known for his warmth and humility, did not speak of rules or discipline. Instead, he asked one simple question: "Why did you move?" Lucas, after a pause, weighted by memories of his own lost brother in childhood, answered quietly, because he reminded me of someone I'd failed to save. The Pope listened without judgment, and with a gentle smile, spoke words Lucas would never forget. Sometimes, the holiest thing we can do is move when we are told to stand still. That conversation, intimate and deeply human, planted a seed in Lucas's heart. Though he continued to serve with flawless precision, something within him had shifted, a silent understanding that duty and compassion were not enemies, but allies. It was this private memory, more than any order or command, that would guide Lucas's hand on the day when the world would be watching and when standing still would no longer be enough. 2 days before the funeral of Pope Francis, Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman received a quiet summons unlike any he had ever experienced. In the shadowed corridors of the Vatican, Father Ventresca, the Pope's aging and trusted secretary, pressed a simple cream-colored envelope into Lucas's hand. No ceremony, no witnesses, only a whispered explanation. It is from His Holiness, meant for you alone. Later, alone in his quarters, Lucas opened the letter with trembling hands. The paper was plain, the handwriting uneven, betraying the frailty of its author's final days. Yet the words carried a weight that no formal decree could match. In the letter, Pope Francis spoke not of obedience nor of protocol, but of the soul. He wrote of the fine line between tradition and compassion, between the visible duties of the Church and the invisible callings of the heart. If one man can carry love into tradition, the Pope had written, then let him do so bravely. The message was not an order. It was a trust, personal, profound, and deeply human. Francis had seen in Lucas not just a soldier of discipline, but a guardian of spirit. He understood that the strength to break silence, when guided by love, could sometimes uphold the very heart of tradition, more powerfully than blind obedience ever could. As Lucas carefully refolded the letter and placed it within the inner pocket of his uniform, he understood the enormity of what had been entrusted to him. When the time came, he would not move for pride nor for defiance, but for something far greater, a promise made not with words alone, but with the quiet bond between two men who believed that true loyalty must, at times, find the courage to move. The moment arrived with a stillness so profound that it seemed the very air in St. Peter's Square had frozen. As the simple cypress coffin of Pope Francis was placed at the foot of the Basilica's grand steps, thousands of mourners held their breath. Dignitaries, clergy, pilgrims, and guards alike. All awaited the ancient rites to proceed, unbroken as they had been for centuries. But then, a sound broke the silence, the firm, deliberate strike of a boot heel against the marble. Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman stepped forward from his line, each movement measured, precise. A ripple of confusion passed through the assembled crowd. Cameras shifted. Cardinals paused mid-prayer. Tradition, so carefully preserved, teetered on the edge of disruption. In full ceremonial dress, Lucas moved with the solemn grace of a man who understood the weight of his actions. From within his breastplate, he withdrew the letter, the fragile, sacred parchment entrusted to him by Pope Francis himself. With a reverence that transcended words, Lucas knelt and gently placed the letter atop the coffin, just beneath the simple wooden crucifix. No words were spoken, none were needed. In that breathtaking moment, Lucas honored not only the man who had led the Church with humility and love, but the deeper spirit of the faith itself. His breach of protocol was not an act of rebellion, but a final salute to compassion, to conscience, and to a bond that had transcended ranks, uniforms, and centuries of tradition. As Lucas stepped backward into formation, his halberd returned to its position, and his face resumed its stoic mask. Yet the echoes of his footsteps would linger far longer than the solemn hymns, carrying a message. Sometimes, standing still, is not enough to honor what truly matters. In the days that followed Lucas Bowman's quiet act of defiance, the great marble halls of the Vatican buzzed with whispers. Behind closed doors, away from the public eye, the Church's highest authorities met in some deliberation. What Lucas had done was undeniable. He had broken protocol during one of the most watched ceremonies in the world. Yet the spirit of his action could not be easily condemned. Within the Apostolic Palace, a private gathering of cardinals, senior clergy, and the Swiss Guard command debated his fate. Commandant Schmid, deeply troubled, argued that centuries of discipline could not allow such visible breaches, regardless of intent. Others, however, urged a more measured view, remembering Pope Francis's own teachings on mercy, compassion, and the need for the Church to honor the heart as well as the law. In the end, a compromise was quietly reached. Lucas Bowman would not be stripped of his service, nor would there be public acknowledgement of his actions. His record went officially unblemished. However, it was understood that he could no longer serve in ceremonial positions, where his face might remind others of that unforgettable moment. A simple envelope delivered to his quarters confirmed his reassignment to the Apostolic Archives, a place far from the cameras, far from the crowds, but rich with the history and quiet dignity Lucas had always cherished. No words of reprimand accompanied his transfer. No grand punishments were issued. Instead, there was a silent recognition that sometimes an act, though disruptive, could still be profoundly right. Lucas accepted his new post with the same steady grace that had defined his years of service, knowing that he had honored not only the Pope's memory, but the deeper truth of his own vocation. As the days turned to weeks and the memory of Pope Francis's funeral slowly blended into history, Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman settled into his new role within the Apostolic Archives. Deep beneath the grand basilicas, among the whispered echoes of centuries past, Lucas found a different kind of silence, one that offered reflection rather than mere obedience. Though his uniform had changed, trading vibrant colors for the humble black of the Archives Division, something far greater had shifted within him. Lucas understood now that true loyalty was not measured by perfect stillness or outward conformity. It was measured by the quiet courage to act when conscience demands it, even when the world expects silence. The letter he had placed upon the Pope's coffin, witnessed by millions, had not been a moment of rebellion, but a moment of remembrance, a reminder that tradition without compassion is hollow, and that discipline, when stripped of humanity, loses its soul. When Lucas crossed paths with younger guards, they still saluted him, but with a newfound respect that words could not fully express. To some, he was the man who had dared. To others, he was the man who had remembered the deeper purpose behind the centuries-old rituals they all served. In the quiet corridors of the Vatican, where ancient manuscripts told the story of faith and endurance, Lucas lived each day with a profound peace. He had not abandoned his duty. He had fulfilled it more fully than ever before. And though he no longer stood proudly in the public eye, he carried something far greater, a quiet legacy, a silent testament to the truth that sometimes the bravest act of loyalty is the one that moves when tradition would demand stillness. In a world where tradition often demands silence and rigid obedience, the story of Lance Corporal Lucas Bowman reminds us that true honor lies not merely in following rules, but in understanding the spirit behind them. Sometimes the greatest act of loyalty is not standing motionless, but having the courage to move when compassion calls. Lucas did not break faith with his duty. He fulfilled it more deeply by recognizing that tradition must serve humanity, not overshadow it. His quiet, respectful act at the funeral of Pope Francis teaches us that discipline without heart becomes hollow ritual. But when married with compassion, it becomes timeless truth. In our own lives, there will be moments when doing what is expected feels safer, but doing what is right demands bravery, especially for those who have lived through eras of change, sacrifice, and service. Lucas's story is a profound reminder. True integrity sometimes asks us to stand apart, to honor not only the letter of tradition, but its soul. Let us never forget that real strength is found not just in standing firm, but in knowing when love and duty are one and the same.